On this episode of Projector, Keanu Reeves regrets letting in strangers when he hears a knock-knock at the door, and TJ Miller sets up a search party when his friend gets lost in Mexico. Hello and welcome to Projector, and first up on the show today is the new horror film from Eli Roth where Keanu Reeves is terrorised in his own home in Knock Knock. Architect Evan, played by Keanu Reeves, is a devoted family man who is left home alone while they go on a weekend trip. However, Evan doesn't get much work done as he answers the door to Genesis and Belle, played by Lorenza Izzo and Ana de Armas respectively, after they get caught in the rain, who soon take advantage of his generosity and seduce him into having an affair. When the guests refuse to leave, it turns out this was all part of a plan to torture Evan and wreck his life and maybe even take it. So while Eli Roth's previous film, The Green Inferno, got tied up in distribution problems and is only just now getting released, Eli Roth has gone away and made another film that has sort of snuck out into the UK early for whatever reason. Knock Knock is an uncredited remake of a 1970s exploitation thriller called Death Game that had Colleen Camp in it. Colleen Camp is actually one of the producers on this movie, and she has a small role in it, playing a nosy next-door neighbour of Keanu Reeves. Now, Eli Roth is a provocateur. He likes to get a rise out of people. He has this very sick frat boy kind of vibe to him. If you get offended at an Eli Roth movie, that's exactly what he was setting out to do. Knock Knock didn't offend me, but it did irritate me quite a lot, and I think that was precisely what Roth was setting out to do. This movie kind of got under my skin a little bit in a way that made me feel a little bit uncomfortable. So the film is basically this battle of the sexes thing going on between Keanu Reeves and two young women played by Lorenza Izzo and Ana de Armas. Izzo is actually Roth's real-life wife, and the character that Keanu plays is the same age as Roth is right now, which, I don't know, could make for some interesting para-reading if I was more interested in Eli Roth than I am. The thing with this setup is that it's essentially a movie of two halves. So the first half of the movie is this slow-burning build-up where the two women arrive soaking wet at Reeves' house, and he orders them a taxi and dries off their clothes and makes conversation while they wait for it to arrive. And so the tension comes from the fact that it's made very clear early on, even if you had no idea what this film was about, that these two women are not simply in the middle of this neighbourhood for no apparent reason. There is clearly some sort of conspiring game between them, and the subject that they talk about in this conversation almost immediately turns to sex. That is clearly where things are heading. They're clearly trying to provoke Keanu into a situation where he's going to commit adultery. He's going to cheat on his wife. He's obviously attracted to them in a way, but he's trying to be a good guy. He's trying to be the honest family man. This first section of the film I actually quite liked because it's the most subtle section of the movie. It's Eli Roth in a surprisingly restrained key. I was actually quite impressed with how this first section of the film played out. The problems with Knock Knock come in the second half. It's almost like an entirely different movie. In fact, weirdly, when the way I see it, the first section of that movie ends when there's a pull-out and it moves and it pans up into the sun, and that's normally like a closing shot to a film, but this happens at the end of a scene. It's almost like it's closing one book and opening into the next one. It's a very odd sort of transition there. And so we get into the next stage of the film where it's essentially them torturing Keanu Reeves for about 45 minutes. That is all you could condense it down to, really. The plot stops moving at that real point. It just turns into all the things that you'd expect Eli Roth to do. It's not a gore fest. It really isn't. It more tries to shock in terms of themes, because there is a lot of things that could push people's buttons in this movie. It's only pushed mine quite a bit. I wasn't scared by the movie though, it just sort of annoyed me most of the time, and I think that's because of the way the characters are written. None of the characters are likeable. Because Keanu commits the affair, and it's pretty clear in the second half of the film that he's not a good guy. He keeps protesting that I'm a good guy. I let you in. Gave you clothes. I did all the right things, and you exploited me. And it's clear that this is a half-hearted defense on his part. He's not. None of those things are true. It's all bringing about things under the surface. His sort of resentment of women that he keeps sort of hidden inside. It's all coming to the surface as they try and agitate him more, as they come into this home and they wreck it. But at the same time, these female characters are not righteous, or at least I didn't interpret them to be righteous, because they are awful. They do torture this guy. They are engaged in the most name-calling, petty vandalism. They draw penises all over his wife's statues, they knock out picture frames, they scrawl over the walls. They're really nasty characters that I didn't enjoy being around. I don't think we're meant to enjoy being around them, but I found them almost unbearable at points. This is one of those movies where I just got my hackles up, just because these characters were clearly intended to be aggressively irritating to the audience, and they succeeded with flying colours. It perhaps doesn't help that they both talk like Eli Roth characters. Eli Roth, you can tell all the lines that Eli Roth wrote in this script because they sound exactly like him, including the fact that he hasn't apparently received the memo that we don't use the R word anymore. Although, that shouldn't be surprising, that is Eli Roth's favourite word. That was the thing that I spent the entire movie trying to work out. Is Eli Roth trying to say something about gender disparity, about the way men see women, and vice versa? And I really don't know, because if you were to take it like that, it seems to imply that all men are cheating scumbags that are at the whim of their desires, always looking for a way to have sex, and young women are basically there to tempt older married men into having affairs and then making their lives a misery. And that's not really a very nice message, but at least you could say it's very critical of both genders equally. I'm sort of tossing and turning over it still. I'm still trying to digest it in some ways. Not because I think it's a masterwork, because it's genuinely one of those movies where I'm not entirely sure how I felt about it at the time, and I'm still not entirely sure. If I reviewed it close to the time, I probably would have given it a more favourable review than I am now, whereas now I'm much less defensive towards it. I don't like some of the things this movie says, I don't like some of the things this movie does, and I don't think this movie really does have anything fresh or new to say about this particular issue. And to be honest, I'm not entirely sure Roth set out with that intention. So what exactly is Roth playing? Good question. Keanu Reeves' performance seemed to be, to me, the first hint of what the film is trying to achieve. Keanu Reeves is sort of on a Keanu-sence, essentially, since John Wick. He's got the same haircut. This looks like it was filmed about 10 minutes after John Wick. In the first half, he delivers a quite solid performance, but when it gets into the torture section, it gets strange. It's almost Shatner-esque. It's almost like a performance that was ready-made to become internet memes. Just take the lines out of context and turn them into GIFs. And I get the sense that Keanu knows what he's doing with his performance. He knows exactly why he's trying to do this. He's clearly been told to try and play up like this. It's a fun performance to have in the lead role. It sort of takes away some of the sting of the movie, but it's a really strange one to critique. And then you have this friend of the family who helps Keanu later in the film. He comes back and he's both black and he's an asthmatic. Guess what happens to this character? He is the token black guy in this movie, and he starts acting like it. He meets these two women and goes, "Nuh-uh, you some skank bitches from the neighborhood." That is almost paraphrasing a line that he says. Why? Why does he talk like that all of a sudden? And the way that this sequence ends with that character doesn't make any sense, considering the way this film closes. The way that those two characters respond to something like that, considering their modus operandi, no logical sense whatsoever. This whole section of the film could be cut and it wouldn't make any difference, and it's really stupid. See, that's the thing. You watch Knock Knock and you think, it seems like Roth is trying to touch on a theme here, and then something stupid will happen, and you just go, why was that in the movie? But the final scene with Keanu in the movie gives away that maybe, just maybe, this was intended to be a comedy, that we weren't supposed to be taking any of the preceding film all that seriously. This is just meant to be almost comically exaggerated. And I will give it this, that scene at the very end of the movie with Keanu actually got a laugh from me, and if that was the final scene in the film, that would have been the perfect punchline. The other way I can tell it's a black comedy is because the scene after that, the actual final scene of the movie, is a second punchline which is so much worse and really does hammer home that yes, this movie was meant to be a comedy of a sort. And I can understand that because Eli Roth's movies like Cabin Fever and Hostel, they have this very dark, pitch black comedy to their gore and gruesomeness playing through them. It makes sense that this movie is almost an out-and-out comedy, and it makes sense with Reeves' performance, the way that he's almost comically exaggerated. That suddenly starts making sense when you start interpreting this as a black comedy, and that's part of the reason why I was so uncertain about the movie. Is okay, have I been misreading the film this entire time? If you're thinking like that, maybe you might like this movie. I didn't. This movie annoyed the hell out of me. And to be honest, that kills all incentive for me to go back and rewatch it again to see if I was in any way wrong. I doubt it. Knock Knock is an infuriating film, and not just because of the characters that populate it. At times it seems like Eli Roth is trying to satirise the sexes, but then it slips into simply becoming juvenile in its attempts to shock in its repetitious second half, which is a shame considering the slow burn of the film's first section. It does appear to be Roth's version of a sick joke, especially given Reeves' oddly hammy turn, but if that's the case, it's not really funny enough, and it certainly isn't all that scary. It's trashy, but it's more interesting than most horror flicks these days, but that doesn't make it good. After the break, I review a film that's blatantly not ripping off The Hangover because it's from one of its writers. Welcome back, as we join TJ Miller and his company as they trek to Mexico when they set up a search party. Believing his friend Nardo, played by Thomas Middleditch, doesn't want to get married to Tracy, played by Shannon Woodward, Jason, played by TJ Miller, objects and ruins the big day. When Tracy goes on the intended honeymoon to Mexico, Nardo tries to go after her and win her back, only to end up naked and stranded in the middle of nowhere. Now it's up to Jason and fellow friend Evan, played by Adam Pally, to try and help him, resulting in a bunch of crazy misadventures on both sides of the border. You know, I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall when Search Party was being conceptualised, because here's the thing, to me, this felt like, and I'm not sure this is anything like the development process for this movie, but here's what it feels like. It feels like Scott Armstrong, who makes his directorial debut here, but is primarily known as a writer for a lot of Todd Phillips movies, who did the script for Hangover Part 2, it seems like what happened is that he wrote a first draft of the Hangover Part 3 where they all go to Mexico, and then he decided, you know what, this script, it's really good. Like, the best thing I've ever written. And he sent it to Todd Phillips, and Todd Phillips said, reads like a first draft, it's not really good enough to be a Hangover movie. But Armstrong was so determined that he basically backed down and said, okay, I will have an executive producer credit on this, you go away, change the title, change all the names with Find and Replace, and make your movie. Just shut up, I'll make the actual Hangover 3. because this is exactly what it plays like. In fact, it's amazing. I'm almost certain that it was probably made at roughly around the same time. This feels like a movie that's been shelved, not aided by the fact that this has been slowly making its way around Europe since the latter end of 2014. It eventually made its way into the UK for a very brief theatrical run in the middle of the summer with virtually no advertising whatsoever. In fact, I'm going to be honest, I was the one person in my screening. One person. You spend the entire movie going, this is basically The Hangover. Like, exactly the same. All the characters are parallels to the characters in The Hangover. Like, TJ Miller's character in this is basically playing Zach Galifianakis, and Adam Pally is Bradley Cooper's character, and Thomas Middleditch is a bit of a combination between Justin Bartha and Ed Helms. You could very easily put those two characters together. The biggest problem with this film is a surprising lack of investment in its premise, especially in terms of its pacing. Oh my god, the pacing! The pacing is terrible in this movie. The opening scene where Thomas Middleditch is essentially, they're all high in the back of this van, and he's explaining how he's a bit nervous about his marriage, which then fuels TJ Miller to object during the actual ceremony later on. This scene feels like it goes on for 10 minutes. It drags on forever. There is barely a joke in this entire sequence of the film. And this opens up the movie. It opens up lethargic, and that is the tone throughout the entire rest of the movie. So what you get is this movie where a guy gets stranded in Mexico, calls up his friends, and his friends seem to treat it like he's just drunk at the bar and they need to pick him up. They don't seem to react like he's in any real danger, which is very, very odd. The other thing is this movie is horrendously padded, almost obscenely so. It takes them an hour to get across the border. How does that happen? How do you have a movie where shenanigans happen across the border where you don't even cross it until the final act of the film? They spent the first 2/3 of this movie prattling around trying to get from Los Angeles down to Mexico, and surely it can't take that long to do that. And of course it doesn't, it's because the movie makes so many stops along the way. The most padded section of the movie also exemplifies one of its biggest issues in that it has all this comedic talent, all of it, and it's just wasted on completely asinine and imbecilic setups. There is a very lengthy 10, maybe 20-minute stretch in the middle of the movie where they go to a casino because for some idiotic reason they think that they're going to pay him some sort of check and they need to go into the casino to do that. But what this ostensibly is to set up is so that Adam Pally can go up to the bar where he meets Kristen Ritter, and he gets seduced by Kristen Ritter, and then he wakes up in a hotel room where a magician, played by Jason Mantzoukas, is also there, and it turns out that Ritter and Mantzoukas have been conspiring together to essentially knock out hotel patrons and take out their organs. The whole sequence feels like Armstrong read it in a magazine article somewhere that this kind of thing happens, and then decided, ooh, that needs to be in my movie. This has nothing to do with anything. This whole stretch doesn't pay off in any way, it doesn't come back in any way once it's over, it's just in the movie for about 10-15 minutes purely to make the whole thing longer and to stretch it out so that they don't cross the border. It's very bizarre. You get this incredibly long-winded sequence where TJ Miller has to come in with a Native American woman that he dated that he couldn't be bothered to remember the name of, and apparently neither can the movie because she's simply credited as Pocahontas because she's a waitress in the casino dressed as Pocahontas. And they have to rescue Adam Pally, who is flopping around like this, despite the fact that he's paralysed. That's not how paralysation works, movie. This is stupid. Really stupid. And there's a load of pratfalling around in a hotel room while Ritter and Mantzoukas are prepping a bathtub full of ice in the next room. How do they not hear any of that? I've been in enough hotel rooms to know that Bathrooms are not soundproof. I'm pretty sure you'd be able to hear it if it was maybe about 10 foot in the next room. They're not exactly sus about it. They smash windows and they dive off the balcony. None of this happens quietly. It's ridiculous, and not in a good way. It's a stupid comedy, but it's not a stupid comedy that has intelligence about it. You know, it's not one of those switch off your brain movies, it's quite cleverly made movies. This is a movie where, this is a film where all the characters in it are idiots. And you spend the entire time going, why are they doing that? Why are they doing this? Oh right, it's to set up a really stupid joke at the end of it. And the only reason that sequence with the casino is in the movie is because Mantzoukas fires flaming arrows from the crossbow. One of the arrows gets lodged in the car and it blows up the car. That's the only reason this is in the movie, is because they needed that, is because they couldn't edit that plot point out. They had to keep it in because the car blows up. Again, to keep them from going across the border longer. I don't understand it. The whole movie feels like it's trying to avoid actually carrying out its premise. It has a really good cast, and I don't understand it. You have Allison Brie, who plays Adam Pally's love interest, and she gets nothing to do. She gets leched over in the most ew way. Like, anytime a woman is on screen, all the male characters turn into awkward, slobbering, sort of lechy dicks. It's not funny. The first scene between them, especially, where they're ogling Alison Brie's ass because she has the audacity to wear a dress to work. She's the most intelligent character in the movie. She is the most responsible character in the movie. She's always the one that's telling them that they need to sort this stuff out. They need to get the authorities involved. But they always treat her with contempt, or go past her, or disobey her, or steal her car. And we're meant to buy that their love interests in the movie? Why? Why? Just because she's a woman and, you know, that has to happen in the movie? And you got Lance Reddick, who plays Adam Pally's boss, and here's another way that the movie stalls. Adam Pally is in line for a promotion, and he spends the entire film having to race back to try and get to various meetings with his boss, and it's initially set up that, okay, you have to get into the sauna with the boss because whoever gets in the sauna gets the promotion. And I'm not going to spoil anything when I say that he manages to miss that. It's not a spoiler because it happens roughly around 30 minutes into the movie. But don't worry, Alison Brie will call him up and say, oh, don't worry, where the hell are you? Don't worry, I've arranged another meeting. So, we have another meeting, he fails that. And this is what the movie keeps doing, is that it has that plot point, but it keeps shifting the goalposts. So, even though they failed to pay off a plot point, it'll just come back up again like it didn't happen. But I haven't even gotten to Thomas Middleditch. You might have noticed that I've been avoiding mentioning that portion of the movie. Here's why. So, I think the reason this movie is having so much trouble finding US distribution is that I've not seen so much full frontal male nudity outside of a porn film. I'm not even kidding. This is a mainstream comedy, or at least it was intended to be, that features loads and loads of Thomas Middleditch. That was a Freudian slip. Thomas Middleditch running around with his penis hanging out. He is full frontal for almost half the movie's running time. You gotta give it to this guy, he has a lot of moxie to run around with no clothes for half the running time. I would not do that. I would especially not do that for a movie like Search Party, which sucks. The movie seems to treat the fact that he's nude for almost the entire running time like it's a joke in of itself, like, ha ha, penis. Okay, I get it. It's the same thing with the Hangover movies where there's male frontal nudity. I suppose you could make an argument in that women for a long time they've had a lot of gratuitous female nudity. It's fair to have an equal side of the equation, but It's not a joke to just have the characters run around naked. They put them in a pair of tights at one point, some Mexican wrestler tights, but I think they're meant to be women's tights. This movie has a very weird fixation with women's clothing, which is another thing that it thinks is inherently hilarious by itself. Because there's a really dumb bit where Adam Pally doesn't want to go, but TJ Miller steals him during the night. He breaks into his apartment while the guy is sleeping and takes him with him, even though he said no. And then they have this conversation in the back of the car where TJ Miller says, "Oh, I picked up your dry cleaning, but whoops, the dry cleaners made a mistake. It turns out it's a women's pantsuit." And so he spends about 15 minutes of the movie walking around in a women's pantsuit because they're for ladies. But they get Thomas Middleditch into these women's clothes, and then the woman goes, "Take off my clothes, take off my clothes," and he forces him to strip off. So he gets to be clothed for about 5-10 minutes, and then he's forced to be naked again, because the plot needs him to be naked for the rest of the movie. And then he has the misfortune of ending up with cocaine smugglers, and the guy that plays the cocaine smuggler, the guy acts like he's Chow from the Hangover movies, except he's not Asian, he's black, because that makes it entirely different. So he's doing all the wacky, wild crap, like he'll just lick the cocaine off Thomas Middleditch's face. It's really stupid and asinine. None of this works. It's amazing how much none of this really works. Here's the thing, it plays like a Todd Phillips movie, but sort of a cover version of a Todd Phillips movie, because all the things in it are things that you've seen before in Todd Phillips movies, or feel like you've seen before in Todd Phillips movies, like Road Trip and Old School and yada yada yada. They get Garfunkel and Oates in there, and they're essentially bookending the movie, and what they're basically doing is Todd Phillips has that running character in movies like Old School of the wedding singer that sings really inappropriate wedding songs or will start swearing during his cover versions. They're doing that. They start doing musical numbers in the movie, and basically, especially I think the very end of the movie, they do this song that was the closest I came to a laugh, and even then I thought that's a joke from a Todd Phillips movie. I mean, this is better than the actual Hangover Part 3, which I despised, because that movie hates humanity. I didn't get that vibe from Search Party. Search Party doesn't hate you. I don't think it has a contempt for its audience like Hangover Part 3 does. It doesn't hate women in the same way that those Hangover movies do. And I can't hate it in the same way as Hangover Part 2 or Hangover Part 3. But at the same time, it's such a waste of time. Why would you bother watching this? Why would you bother watching this when The Hangover exists? And one last thing. Halfway through the credits, they actually have the audacity to do a mid-credit scene where they set up for a sequel. And they bring back the gangster at the end of the movie where he does some more Chow stuff. And I'm just thinking to myself, yeah, good luck with that. That is never happening ever. Search Party is such a lifeless, uninspired version of the movie it's copying that it could almost pass for a mockbuster. This is the sort of dumb comedy that gives them a bad name, where the characters behave so stupidly and unrealistically for the sake of bad jokes that it all falls flat, purely to pad out the running time because the movie keeps getting distracted. It's also a complete waste of a talented comic cast as they try to mug life into the material, especially the rather dedicated Thomas Middleditch, but they're undone by a movie that doesn't even have dick jokes so much as just plain dick. So as you know, this is the first episode since the closure of Blip, and this is essentially me cleaning house, because these were a couple of films that got caught up while I was doing other projects, and then I had to move all my videos to other hosting arrangements. Hopefully we should be able to continue on as normal, but if you would like to support me in this rather tough time, I do have a Patreon account right here where my fingers are pointing. And generally with any video producer, not just me, but with anyone, if you like their work, if you enjoy watching their work, if you agree with their opinions, if you disagree with their opinions, just spread the word about it. Tweet, comment, whatever, just talk about it, because it means that people get to see them, and that's the important thing for content creators, is that people see their content and they know about it, okay? Until the next episode, I'm Matthew Buck, fading out.